But there's a question like in Matthew 15:4, where Christ says, let me get it so I don't misquote. For God said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses them.
Yeah, I know that one. I hope you're asking sincerely, because I know Muslims use this out of context to pervert its meaning. Because yes, I know what you're referring to. Honor your father and mother, and whoever does not honor his father and mother is to be put to death. That's now an allusion to Deuteronomy 21, and he's referring to 18 to 21. And so I know your objection, but I want you to articulate your objection so I can show you how not to interpret the Bible.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is that is the literal text of that how Christians interpret it? Like,
how can you? Okay, I want you to think logically, because you sound like you're a logical thinker. When Jesus quotes that passage, the Jews are no longer ruling over the land. They're under the yoke of Rome, and as subjugated citizens of Rome, did they have any authority to put anyone to death? Now, before you answer the question, I'm going to give you the answer. Can you go to John 18:31?
Yes.
Have your Bible.
John
18:31.
21.
31.
Okay.
Read it for me.
Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law, but we have no right to execute anyone. They objected.
So could the Jews kill anyone?
No.
And Jesus knew that, right?
I presume so, yes.
How would you presume so when he's living under Roman rule?
Yes, hence I presume he would know.
Yeah, but presume means that you're not completely certain. So I'd say yes, he knew definitely. So unless Jesus was trying to start an insurrection, a revolt, he could not mean that that law is to be applied in his time when Israel was a theocracy. His simple point is that the law takes seriously the dishonoring of one's parents, that you have to love your parents and honor them. Otherwise, you bring God's judgment on you. And yet here you find a loophole in the law to give them the excuse to dishonor their parents.
Okay, so it's so you wouldn't Christians have never thought that they were going to kill the children if they disobeyed, because isn't that in the Ten Commandments anyways?
Well, can you show me in the Ten Commandments where it says put the rebellious son to death?
I don't think it says that. It says honor your father and mother, right?
And that's repeated in the New Testament in Ephesians 6 verses 1-3. Paul repeats it. You're confusing the Old Testament when it's a theocracy and you have judges and priests and later on kings who are supposed to govern the land according to God's legislation, with the church, which is no longer a theocracy in the sense that the church is not the government. It cannot impose God's law upon its citizens and also bring about all the punishments that the law demands depending on the infractions committed. Why are you confusing the two?
Oh, well, I guess out of ignorance, right?
No, it's okay. I'm not saying this to put you down. What I'm saying is, if you're going to read the Old Testament fairly and honestly, like I do the Quran, I know maybe some Christians don't, but I don't do that. I read the Quran contextually, within its own context and its historical sources, which Muslims are the ones who reject, but put that aside. In the Old Testament, God formed a nation and gave that nation a land and gave that nation borders and then gave that nation leaders to then make sure that that particular piece of real estate was governed according to God's law. And if those people refuse, then there would be penalties, fines that would be levied on them, as any government, any kingdom does to its citizens. When Jesus comes, he doesn't implement a theocracy, meaning he doesn't give Christians a piece of real estate, and that real estate they are to govern according to his rule, and those who fail to honor his rule will then suffer the due consequences, the penalties and the fines and so on. Because Jesus himself said, if you go to John 18:33-37, read that for me. Go to John 18:33-37.
Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
Keep reading.
Is that your own idea? Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? And am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent
read
my
that part
arrest
again.
by the...
One time. Jesus said what?
My kingdom is not of this world.
Because if it was, what would
my servants would fight to prevent my arrest.
And then go ahead, finish it.
By the Jewish leaders, but now my kingdom is from another place.
Okay, right there. How much plainer could Jesus make it? That my kingdom is not of this world. I reign from heaven. Because if it was an earthly kingdom, then I would raise up my subjects to then kill those who are trying to arrest me and get me killed.
When Jesus said on the parable, or the Sermon of the Mount, sorry, he says, my kingdom will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Does he not also mean earth as well there?
Okay, where in Jesus' statements do you get that Jesus is not saying that his kingdom won't be on the earth? But who's going to implement God's kingdom on the earth? You, me, or when Jesus returns?
Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world.
So then that means you're not going to take Jesus and pit him against himself. Yes, God's kingdom will be on earth, and God will rule on earth the way he rules in heaven. But that's not a present reality. We do all we can to make it a present reality in our own lives, but the fulfillment of that is when Jesus returns, which is what the Bible teaches and which what you believe as a Muslim. Isa's coming back to be a just ruler, right?
Yes, yes.
That's when thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right now, as a Christian, I do all I can to make God's will, and God's rule, my rule, to the best of my ability, but I can't impose God's rule on others. That I don't have the right to do. When Jesus comes, then God's kingdom will be fully implemented on earth as it is fully implemented in heaven.
But like you'd still say the world matters, and like you would want
Of
your
course
own
it does.
government to, like not
Absolutely.
Gnostics, right?
Absolutely. Why do you think we go about trying to preach the gospel? Because when you get converted, when you have a convicted heart and you turn to Jesus, you will now think God's thoughts after him and do things that please God and no longer do the things that displease him. In other words, if you love the Lord, you won't have sex before marriage. You won't condone abortion. You won't condone slavery or oppression, etc., etc. So as an individual, you're going to now stop doing the things that God hates and implement the things that God does. And you're going to work within the system to try to make sure that legislators will legislate in a way that puts God's interest ahead of their own. But you can't impose that.